Hey everybody, it's Rothbard's Disciple here, and I'm bringing you guys a video on how to scale Memo using tokenization. And this is what I've been saying that Memo needs to do for, like 6 to 8 months now. Nobody at Memo's listened. I've sort of talked to some of the people behind it. Not like in depth like they would know of me, but I was always kind of a dick when I did it, so they never listened to me anyways. But I want to show you guys how easy it is to scale Memo and do everything that Memo tries to pretend that it does. And just do it completely better if you use tokenization and hashes. And just so you guys know, the tokenization and hashes, I'm basically applying the rule or the protocol that Bitcoin transactions follow, except for to tokenize data, whatever that data is, okay? And so for any of these different ideas that I've been coming up with and releasing videos on, these ideas are not necessarily my own. I'm just applying Bitcoin's protocol to things that are not transactions or not transactions of Bitcoin themselves, okay? So it's not like I'm some super smart guy here. I'm just doing, I'm just applying the rules to different categories, I guess, different categories of transactions. And this is what the people behind Memo don't understand, because I've told them a million times that they are breaking Bitcoin's fundamental protocol to try and force their shitty protocol down our throat, and they're always like, no, everything on Memo is like it's a normal transaction. It comes up just fine. It doesn't break any of the consensus rules. And it's like, that's not what I mean. What I mean is when you add data to Bitcoin, there's a specific way that Bitcoin does it for its transactions, and there's a specific reason it does it that way for its transactions. And so the way that Bitcoin transactions work, just so you guys know, is it contains a hash of the previous transaction. And so technically speaking, the way Bitcoin works is that you're actually just following coins from their creation, and then you follow all the transactions that follow, and so technically speaking, a lot of people say things like you never own coins. I think that's a real stupid way to say it, but the way it is that the coins are always moving, so it's only like you have coins in addresses that haven't been spent yet, but Bitcoin is a verb. It's more of a happening, okay? And so that's what I want to do with the tokenization for things like Memo, is that I want to use hashes that that represent the previous hash for whatever that token represents for that last transaction, and I just want to hash those together in chains, okay? So that way you don't actually have to check all the data all the time. And so the way Memo does it right now, if you guys use Memo, is that you have to do one transaction per Memo thing, and the data goes straight to the blockchain. One, this is real stupid for privacy concerns, like what happens if communism comes later, and then all you people who talked about how you love capitalism, you all get put in gulags because you have all this information put publicly on the blockchain. It's like, that's real stupid, and you can never take it off. Whatever you posted there, it's there forever. You guys are all idiots who've been using it. But if you were to use something like hashes, then you don't know what the actual data is that you're putting to the blockchain, but you still know that it represents the original tweet. So what I've been saying that they need to do for Memo is Memo needs to quit putting the actual tweets to the blockchain, but instead hash the tweets every once in a while. So let's say every week. That's what we're going to do for our example here. So then rather than hashing every tweet, you just hash once every week. But if we actually go through creating a token for this on Electron Cash, and just so you guys know, the functionality in Electron Cash does not exist yet to do something like this, so I've had to sort of if you look at that, I've obviously gone into Paint or whatever, and Photoshop and edited over some of these things to make it suit my purposes here. But there's two different steps in creating a token for something like Memo. The first step is the Genesis token. And so the Genesis token can be anything. It can be your first tweet or just something that doesn't matter. But you just hash something just so that you have the start of all the hashes that you've ever put for Memo. And just so you guys know, each person who hashes to Memo will hash from a different address, and so that you'll be able to very easily follow someone's tweets from the beginning of time and make sure that they've never been censored from the beginning of time by just checking the hashes of their weekly tweet rather than checking each tweet individually. Okay, and so for your Genesis tweet, if you look at this right here, if you get into the Electron Cash function for creating tokens here, the token name and token or ticker symbol doesn't really matter that much. I just put here the weekly hash, and the reason why I called it the weekly hash is it's just the hash for my weekly tweets. The ticker symbol, I have RWMH just to stand for, the R stands for Rothbards, W stands for weekly, And then it's memo hash, so Rothbard's weekly memo hash is what the RWMH stands for. Again, this is just random, my putting this in here. The next two options that I think should be there for creating a token and also should be there for when you send a token are the previous file hash and the current file hash. Like we said, this is the genesis creation of this token, and so we don't actually have any other tweets before this tweet. So the previous tweets that we have hashed to the blockchain are 0 because this is our first one. So there is no previous file hash here, okay? The current file hash, since this is the genesis hash, it's like probably your first tweet. So I just have some random, I don't even remember exactly what I hashed right there, but I hashed something. And so that whatever that was my first tweet. So we're saying that's my current file hash. And so for these tokens, the way you would want to create these tokens would be created by Memo in some sort of like multi-sig address with each user. And they would have a certain quantity of tokens that they would create. And in this case, I created 100 tokens. There's no decimal places for these tokens, so I can only spend them one at a time. And so what this would represent it would mean that if I wanted to use Memo, and let's say Memo used a fee, maybe I paid a fee for 100 weeks worth of hashes. And the other thing too is that if Memo does ads, the ads should pay for fees so long as they follow my protocol rather than the protocol they do right now. The protocol they do right now is way too expensive for fees to cover it. It won't do it. But the protocol I'm talking about, fees will, or advertising will cover the fees for all the tokenizing and hashing that you're doing. But anyways, like I said, you just create this token, these tokens, and each one of these tokens, each week you'll just have one that is automatically sent to some receiving address, and like I said, since it's a multi-sig address, it'll be sent through signatures from Memo and each user. So Memo and the user both have to verify that the hash is correct before the hash gets added to the blockchain. Okay, and that's where the magic of this works, is because if Memo tries to screw you over and censor you, then the token won't go to the blockchain because you won't sign it, because their hash won't be the same as the hash that you got. You know what I'm saying? And so you both have to agree on this, and that's where the censorship resistance comes here. Okay, so if you tried to create your first Memo tweet or whatever, and when you try to tokenize or when you hash this tweet and you got 094 and you put it in this token here and you try to create the token, if Memo tried to bar you from creating that token, you know they're trying to censor you. And so you have proof of it. You have proof of it, and you can be like, look, I'm trying to get this working with Memo, it's not working, they're censoring me. You have proof of it. And then the good thing about this too is that if you actually have everything separated so that it's in multi-sig addresses, you can have your own personal tweets stored on your own local computer. So obviously in this case, for your Genesis tweet, for your Genesis transaction or Genesis token, since this is your first tweet ever, if they censor you, it's pretty easy to move yourself over to another platform. But going on, if we go on to for your second token, so like let's say you've already created your first token, right? So our first token that we had here, it had the hash 0948, and if we're going to create our second token, and our second token, again, this is just the hash of all the tweets that we've done for this week, right? And so our second token, what it should have showing up in this wallet, and this is what I added below, like everything above is fine, you just have it paid to some receiving address, and like I said, we're paying one token because one token represents one weekly hash for my Memo account. And so it would already have, like this, the Memo token should already automatically link back to the previous hash. Okay, so the previous hash was 0948. That needs to be in there. That's the middle one there. What's in the gold there where it says current hash, that is the current hash of all the tweets that I have this week. So the current hash is my tweets for this week, and it starts with 7EE3, and it goes on and on or whatever. So it starts with 7EE3. That's my current hash of tweets. I need to add that to my previous hash, so I just concatenate them, and by concatenate I just mean you put them together. It's almost like you glue them together one after the other. And once I concatenate them, I take the hash of the concatenation of the current hash and the previous hash, and I get the new root hash, which is D75, and it ends with the triple E there, okay? And so what you would actually have on the next transaction is the next transaction would, for my next week, once I wanted to add my next week of tweets, once I wanted to hash those and put those on the blockchain, it would link back to the new root hash. So what would be the previous root hash, or what is the new root hash now would be the previous root hash for the next transaction, and that's how that would work. But these three things here at the bottom, when you try and do a transaction within Electron Cash, it's not there. Like, this information does not exist there. And this really is unfortunate because, as you can see here, if we look at this, if you actually look at the data on the blockchain, if you look this up on a blockchain explorer, for the creation of the tokens, like we said, the only thing we did for the creation of the tokens is we put the current file hash and we put 0948. And so if you look at the transaction data for the Genesis creation of our Memo tokens, you can see, I don't know how to exactly to read that decoded op return thing there below. Those are some crazy symbols. I don't understand it, but obviously you can see it's a genesis of, I was creating the RWMH weekly hash token. So like, you have all that information there. It's obvious what that was, and it has the correct hash. It has the hash that starts with 0948. Unfortunately, for some reason, the way it shows up in this blockchain explorer, you can't see the full hash. You have to actually, you have to highlight it and copy it and then paste it in some like notepad or something like that, and then you can see the full hash. But that full hash is actually correct with the hash that we put here in for our Genesis. And if you guys want to look this up, I'll put the transaction IDs in the information below, so that you guys can actually look this up and you can see that the hash does equal the hash that is here on my first token here. So you guys can verify this, because this is what the whole blockchain is about. It's a distributed ledger so that you can have proof for everyone that's verifiable for everyone. But where the problem comes in is when you actually try to do the second part. Like I said, when you do the second part, there's nothing that allows you to put new hashes in this. It doesn't allow you to link to old hashes. But what's really, really unfortunate is if you actually look at the blockchain data here, the blockchain, like, you have all the information ready, like you have the space ready for you to put in 2 hashes. And like I said, all you need, if you go back to the sending of this token, the only things that you need to have on this token are the new hash and some hash that links to the previous transaction. And the previous transaction, like we said, has the hash of the last new hash. So you have to have some sort of chain that you link together, okay? And so the problem here is if you're actually looking at this transaction data here, and for this part, we're actually going to be looking at a third transaction. And this transaction, I actually moved 5 tokens. And like I said before, if these were actual tokens that I were moving, I would only want to move 1 token at a time, because each token represents 1 weekly hash. But I just wanted to move 5 tokens to show you what some of these this blockchain data looks like when you're sending a token an additional time. So if you look at this third transaction, again, I moved 5 tokens, and so if you look at the op return entries, there's 4 entries there. The third entry, it's the number 5, and if we go back and we look at the entry for the second transaction we did, the third entry is a number 1, and like we said, for the second transaction we only moved 1 token. So that third entry represents how many tokens you're moving. The problem here is I don't know what that fourth entry here in op return represents. It probably represents something, but like I said, there needs to be some entry that represents the new hash for the file you're putting on there, and that simply doesn't exist. The one good thing is that you do have a reference hash, but this reference hash references your Genesis your Genesis transaction. So if we look at our third transaction, again, if we look at the data for this third transaction, it links back to, again, the second entry links back to the Genesis transaction. Okay, it starts with a DF4. That's the Genesis transaction. The second transaction that we did, it started with 53BF0, and that's the one that we want. Again, if we link back to 53BF0, you can see the hash that would be there for that second transaction. But again, like we said, not only are we not linking back to the previous transaction, which is, again, that's the whole structure and that's the whole way that Bitcoin works, but we also are not adding new hashes each time you do this transaction. So there's no way for you to add data in chains in a very scalable way when you're using Memo. So they really don't understand how to use the blockchain, and so it's really going to cause them a lot of problems. One thing that is really stupid with Memo is I'm pretty sure Memo had a lot of outages during this stress test. If Memo would have just used these hashes, it wouldn't have really have mattered because they wouldn't have had to put that many hashes to the blockchain anyways. And if your hashes take a couple extra hours when you only post one a week, like what does it really matter to you? You know what I'm saying? So even if you were having the biggest congestion in the world, which even during these stress tests, it doesn't seem like there's that much strain on the network. Like I guess I didn't watch it all that in depth, but I was still able to post things to the blockchain, like I did some of these real quickly here. Right before I made this video, so it seems real easy to do even when there's, or it seems like if they would just have these hashes, these stress tests wouldn't be an issue for them at all. The problem is that they try and put everything on the blockchain and do a transaction for everything, and that's not the way you're supposed to do it. Okay, but again, the functionality does not exist for me to link hashes or transactions together in hashes. Just the way that Bitcoin transactions are done, but again, these hashes are for tokens, and these tokens represent something, but it's just not actual transaction data. But I can't link these hashes together in a chain, again, in a chain of transactions. I can't do it, and every time I do a new transaction, I should be able to put a new hash on there. I can't do that either. So those are the two main problems that I have. So I hope this sort of helped explain a couple of the issues that I have with the current software that's out there. I do want to really, congratulate Gerald Fukeball on Electron Cash SLP. This is the first wallet that's ever allowed me to even pretend to do any of these things that I want to do. But that being said, we still got work to do, and if we can get this done, there's a lot of real big things that you can do out of a protocol like this, and I think it's got a lot of potential to just help scale a bunch of different things. That's actually something you guys won't see this yet, but I had an interview with Chris Schul. He's the guy who I made the video on his music, but he and I talked about doing smart contract tokenization on Bitcoin Cash, and we were specifically talking about the idea I had where you chain sort of kind of intellectual property together to create songs collaboratively in sort of a peer-to-peer fashion. He said to me that that's sort of been tried before, which it doesn't surprise me, but the one thing that I forgot to mention that would have been great to have said was that if you do this on Bitcoin, and if you do these hashes together, or if you do these hashes correctly, such that you chain them in a chain of transactions, where one hash can represent more than one thing that you've done. The reason that this is so crazy on Bitcoin is because of the way that it scales. And so the whole point of doing tokenizations and or creating tokens that are hashes that represent some sort of data off chain, whether it's a digital file or tweets on Memo or whatever. The reason why doing it on Bitcoin is so revolutionary is because when you actually do these in hashes that you chain the hashes together over time, this is a really scalable way to have all this data represented, and it's very easy for any individual user to check their transaction all the way back to the beginning, because with something like hashes, your computer can do thousands of transactions, but calculations per second. So your computer can real easily calculate through thousands of transactions if it has to, but how many tweets to Memo are you really going to have over your lifetime? Like we said, even if you're doing one tweet a week, if you're on Memo for 100 years, that's 5,200 hashes. Your computer can do that in a few seconds. It might even be 1 second. It probably is 1 second. But so it's not at all any sort of problem for scaling, and that's why this protocol for hashing and tokenization it's so much different and revolutionary on Bitcoin. And obviously this doesn't work for everything, but for something like Memo, it definitely makes them scale. It makes it a lot easier for them to prove that they're censorship resistant. It's better in every single way and shape. So if you guys understand this, try and get this to the Memo people, or at least this idea. Don't maybe don't say it came from me, because like I said before, I think I kind of made them mad. I didn't say nice things to them when I brought up these issues. So I don't think they like me, if they know who I am. Hopefully they just don't know who I am. But just try and explain this idea to them and just say, hey, look, we should start using hashes and then chaining these hashes together, and then allow people to, instead of having to do a transaction for every tweet, maybe do a transaction every couple of tweets, or once a week, or once a month, or however much the user wants to do it. And then Memo just becomes basically free. And it's super simple, super scalable, and it's just way better. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. There will be more coming out soon.